Hey there, guys. I've spent about 5 years of my life, some time, pretty significant time, flipping comic books and making some hobby money. I've probably made, I've made well over $5,000. I want to keep it conservative here. I've got four different options that you could try if you're interested in flipping comic books for money in this video. So again, I want to point out these are all my experiences. I'm trying to use my examples, real life examples where I can. And I hope you enjoy this video. If you're into comic books and if you'd like to, sort of have a mentality of providing value for collectors, then hopefully you'll find this video valuable. Now, when most people think of flipping comic books or making money off of comic books, they're thinking about stacks of super old 1938 to 1940 Batman and Superman comics that are hidden in somebody's attic, and somebody finds a stack of them and suddenly they're in auction and they've sold them for $4 million. So I'm certainly not saying that it never happens, but I do think it's becoming increasingly rare that you're going to find an attic full of millions of dollars worth of comics. If you Google Mile High Comics Collection, there's a great blog by the guy who founded Mile High Comics about when he found he discovered an old cache of comics worth literally millions of dollars. And it's a fascinating blog post to read. But for the most part, most of us are going to be buying comic books and then flipping them and making a few dollars here and there. And it's a fun hobby, but you're not going to get, millionaire riches from it. Another common myth is that anything that's modern, any comic book from say 1980 onwards, is practically worthless. And you see this online. If you ever Google like, how much are my comics worth? It almost always says your comics are worthless and it's only really old, rare comics that are worth lots of money. That has not been my personal experience. And again, everything in this video is stuff that I've done myself. So again, if you have a different experience, wonderful, but I'm going to tell you my experience. And a lot of it involves flipping modern day comics, which I've made, like I say, thousands of dollars doing it and had a pretty good time doing it. It is a lot of work. I'm not going to lie. It's no get rich quick, but you can certainly make money flipping modern comics. Okay, so the first option that you can use is to buy a high grade CGC or slabbed comic book and essentially just sit on it for years. So an example here would be Amazing Spider-Man or Amazing Fantasy featuring Spider-Man, basically a key comic book, and you buy it, you put it in a vault somewhere, and then 10, 20, 30 years later, you wind up selling it for much, much more than what you paid for it. So it's like a true investment. So if you're interested in this route, what you need to do is buy the highest grade that you can afford, and you want to focus on key issues. And a key issue is something that has usually a first appearance, or it's somehow very, very valuable and sought after by many different collectors. So an example would be early Silver Age Marvels, or early DC Golden Age comics, or important issues in the industry where collectors by and large would like to own that issue. So the general idea is that the demand is so much greater than the supply that it's a relatively safe way to buy a comic book and stick it in a vault for 30 years, because chances are good that 30 years from now someone will still want a Captain America comic or a Spider-Man comic, a Batman or Superman comic. Here's some examples of some books that I've purchased over the years. I try to stick to what they call blue chip investing comics. So these would be things that feature easily recognizable superheroes that have a high probability of still being around when I'm, super old. So looking at things like Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman. This is an example here of a World's Finest comic book. It was actually called World's Best Comics #1 when it first came out. And it was one of the first issues that features Superman, Batman, and Robin together. And it really formed the basis of what we know as World's Finest comics. So I purchased this one a few years ago and held on to it and then flipped it for a few dollars. When you start talking about Silver Age comics, you're really talking about 1960s books for the most part. And what I'd recommend is sticking to, again, you have to kind of imagine 20 years from now and say, okay, what's going to be around? Is, Mickey Mouse still going to be around 20 years from now? Is Spider-Man still going to be around 20 years from now? So I'd recommend buying keys that where you're really playing the odds in your favor. So for example, Amazing Fantasy 15, that's the first appearance of Spider-Man. Every comic book collector pretty much on the planet would like to own a copy of that. So chances are good if you pay a reasonable value today, 20 years from now you can sell it for a profit. Amazing Spider-Man 1 through 50 is also very sought after. And then I just threw in two Action Comic examples. One is 242, which is the first appearance of the Candor Bottle City and also Brainiac. And then 252, which is the first appearance of Supergirl. Avengers 4, first appearance of Captain America. Fantastic Four #1, which is a landmark issue. Really the first Marvel superhero team. And then Showcase #4, which is the first appearance of the Flash. And there's many, many, many more examples. So again, the pictures that I've got there, these are two books that I've just purchased over the years, and I flipped them for a couple $100. One was the first appearance of Electro, and the other one is the first appearance of the Justice League. Typically what you want to do is buy books knowing that movies are coming up, and then you buy the book like maybe a year or two ahead of the movie. And again, you're guessing, you're speculating, but then when the movie comes out, then you sell into the strength where a regular fan goes, wow, that was a really great movie, and they buy the book, usually at its peak market value. But again, if you're buying these and you're holding them for 20 or 30 years, then you can just enjoy them, put them in a vault, take them out and show them to your friends, and enjoy them and sell them years and years down the line. Bronze Age comics are, for the most part, if they're high grade, they can still be pretty valuable. These are mostly 1970s comics. The top ones being, I would say, Incredible Hulk 181, first appearance of Wolverine, and the other one is Amazing Spider-Man 129, which is the first appearance of the Punisher. Now, there's other books in there as well, like Batman's Neil Adams and Denny O'Neil. They had a pretty good run there in the 1970s. There's also Green Lantern, Green Arrow run that Neil Adams did as well with Denny O'Neil. There's the X-Men, early X-Men books. So when I say early X-Men books for Bronze Age, what I mean is the new X-Men, the ones featuring Storm, Wolverine, that sort of thing. So there's different Bronze Age books that if you buy them in high grade, 9.4s, 9.2s, 9.8s, you can pretty much buy them and just hold them for years. And the chances are that when you flip them years down the line, you'd sell them for more than what you paid for them. Now, modern age books can be a bit tricky. If you're not really up to date on comic books, you can get burned. And really what it is you get hype because every month the local comic book store wants to sell you what's current. And so everything is a collector's item, a first appearance, a first issue, hollow cover, there's all sorts of gimmicks. So what you want to do in the modern age books is probably look to things that are either, 1980s or maybe early 1990s at the latest, unless it's something that's really groundbreaking, like a Walking Dead #1. There's some newer series that have come out, but again, those are very speculative. If you're going to buy something and just hold on to it, chances are something like an Amazing Spider-Man 300, which is the first real appearance of Venom, Batman Adventures #12, which is your first appearance of Harley Quinn in the DC universe. These are sort of tried and tested. Chances are these appearances are going to mean something 20 years from now or even 10 years from now. New Mutants 98 is one that's very controversial because there's so many copies of New Mutants 98 that people wonder 20 years from now, is somebody going to care about Deadpool's first appearance? So far, the answer is yes, because a 9.8 is still going for hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So it all comes down to how much you pay, and then if you have a high enough grade, and then you basically keep it safe, and then you turn around and you sell it. So the second option is pretty obvious if you've taken any sort of business training or business schooling. The general idea is you buy wholesale and then you sell retail. So option #2 is buying large lots of comics. So a lot being you buy multiple comics, hundreds of comics, maybe thousands of comics all at the same time for one price. And then you sell them one by one individually. And then the combined sales of your individual comics outweighs what you purchased when you bought them as one huge lot. So of course the big question then is where can you find lots and are there any deals to be had on eBay? So I'll talk about where to find lots first. The It's been my personal experience that if you go to garage sales or estate sales, the exact opposite of what you're hoping to happen will happen. So you're going to go to a garage sale and there's going to be a box of comics sitting over in the corner and they're going to be priced at $10 each, and they're going to be like 1990s Archie comics, which are completely worthless. But some housewife is sitting there thinking that, since all comic books are worth tons of money, these are vintage collector comics. They're not. So 99.9% of comics you're going to find at garage sales are low grade garbage that aren't worth anything. Everybody seems to think that comics are worth a ton. I talk to friends and I mention comics on occasion, and people who aren't experts will say to me, "Oh, I've got a stack of comics back in my log cabin, and boy, they're probably worth millions." Well, they're not worth anything. They're beat up old Archie comics that are worth nothing. So it's rare you're going to find a garage sale or an estate sale. It's possible. You have a better chance of going into the local classifieds, and what you want to do is find somebody who's either they're not collectors, but they're just trying to dump off their garbage. So you could go to like a storage, like when you go to a storage lot, sometimes they'll have lot auctions. You can also just talk to friends, just put out the word and just say, hey, if anybody's got any old collections they want to get rid of, let me know. The idea is you're selling a value to them and you're saying, I can clean up your garbage for you and pay you some money rather than you doing hours and days and weeks of work trying to unload this stuff. You can also just set up a website and say, hey, I'm interested in purchasing comics. And people will reach out to you and say, I've got an old stack of comics and blah, blah, blah. You're going to be hunting. It's going to be wild goose chases, but you could eventually find a deal. The easiest one for you to at least start is to go to eBay and then just buy large lots of books, which again, that'll be my next example here is eBay specifically. So again, I've used this method repeatedly and I've had pretty good success with it. I do want to caution you, it is a lot of work. You have to look at it like a part-time job. What you do is you go online, you go onto eBay, you set up an alert, or you just search and you basically type in comic book lot, and then you just search from top down, meaning highest price down. And so I've bought comic book lots worth $1,300, $2,000, and you buy hundreds and hundreds of comics. And then what happens is you get this massive lot show up at your house, or you go somewhere and pick it up if you want to save on shipping. And then you sort them all, you get them graded possibly, and then you sell them all individually. So you can flip them raw on eBay, which is fine, or you can also go and get them graded, which I'll talk about in a later section. Another method that I've had pretty good success on is buying in an auction and then just turning around and flipping the book and then just listing it for a fixed price. So I've done this with a few different websites. Basically, they'll have auctions that end weekly or monthly or quarterly, and then you drop, $400 on a book. You buy it at an auction for $400, and then you just literally never get the book shipped. You just say to the auction website, please just hold the book for me. I'd like to relist it. And then you list it for, $750, and then somebody comes along and buys it. So I'll just go through a few examples here. I just pulled three kind of random. I've used mycomicshop.com for years, and I really like their service. When I buy a book in auction, I just don't get it shipped. I just keep it there, and then they just put it back into fixed price, and I just list it. So I've got three examples. These are my examples, personal examples. Again, I don't want to pull just numbers out of the air, so I just pulled my history off of my comic shop, and these are some books that I've flipped over the years just as an example. So you can see in the first example, I bought an Amazing Spider-Man number 50. That's the first appearance of the Kingpin. Pretty cool issue. I bought a CGC 8 for $12.95 in auction. And then when I sold it for $1,515. So I netted $1393.80. So what happens is, I netted about like $100 off of that one. And if you do this enough times, I only had to do that 50 times and I've netted, $5,000. And again, I might do this like 4 or 5 times a year. You basically go into the auction, you buy something. I just use store credit, and so I don't get dinged with any fees. It doesn't cost me the 3% consignment fee to purchase it, and it doesn't cost me the fee to receive it as PayPal because I'm not receiving it as PayPal. I'm just getting it as store credit. So I just have a large store credit that I just keep rolling. So the balance has just gone from like 2,000 in store credit to like 7,000 in store credit. So you just keep buying them, and then someday It's like at the casino, I'll just cash out and just move on. This next example is much more common. Amazing Spider-Man 73. It was a 6.0. I bought it in auction for $44 and then I sold it for $68. So what I wound up doing was netting about 16 bucks, let's say, after everything's done. So again, you're not talking huge amounts of money here, but if you do this enough times, I've probably done that 200 times maybe. So that's what, 1600 times two, so maybe 3,000 bucks, just with the $20 flip. I call it the $20 flip. If you can net 20 bucks out of it, then I usually will purchase it in auction. And again, I mean, it doesn't cost me anything because I'm just using store credit and I'm just flipping it. So again, I just go into the auctions a few times a year and I'll just use up my credits, buy them if I can find a good deal. I'll be honest with you, in the auctions, there's lots of people doing this. So typically I will buy maybe one out of every 10 books that I'm trying to buy, I'll actually be able to purchase. 9 out of every 10 I'll get outbid on. So I'm very picky about what I buy. And I also know what the market value is on these books. So I'm able to pull the pin and buy something knowing that I'll be able to flip it, for the most part, at a higher rate later on. And here's another example, Amazing Spider-Man 316 9.8. It's a classic Venom cover. I bought it in auction for $247. I knew it was trending around 300, 320. So again, time's on your side if you buy like what they consider to be a key comic, because chances are it'll trend upward over the years. So I bought this one and then like 2 years later I flipped it and I netted like 294 after the sale. So I sold it for 320 and then I netted 294. So that's about 50 bucks maybe. $45. Again, you're not making a huge amount of money. And lots of people will say, well, you could make more money just investing in stocks. And hey, no argument here. I'm not saying you have to do it this way. It's one option. And if you happen to know a genre, or if you happen to just find an auction someday that where the prices are relatively low, then you can dip your toe in and grab a few books and then just list them again at fixed price. And sometimes you'll buy stuff where the CGC case is damaged, and then you can just get the books either shipped to your house, or you can get the books sent off to CGC for $15 and get them reslabbed. Sometimes people don't want to buy damaged slabs. So sometimes there's some value in auctions. Not always, but sometimes. So option number 4 is kind of a combination of the previous ones. You buy possible keys, keyword being possible, and then you get them slabbed. And then if they become important books, then you can sell them for a pretty significant profit. The other slight modification of this is you buy possible keys raw. You wait until they become important, then you'll go get them slabbed. So you might have like a comic book room filled with a bunch of 20 copies or 30 copies of each book, and then when a movie hits or when it turns out that character is a big deal, then you run off to CGC, you get them all slabbed, and then you can sell them all when demand is higher. So I've got 3 examples that I used that I actually made some pretty good money on. So I'll go through those 3 examples. So the first one was Thor #1, which back in 2014, when this comic book came out, to me, if a comic book is being mentioned in the mainstream, so for example, they mentioned this comic on like daytime television, they would mention, oh, there's a new female Thor, and Marvel Comics is doing something new with a female Thor. So my ears perked up. So I went to the comic book store and I purchased every #1 I could find. I bought about 20 copies of Thor #1. Then I went online, and on eBay, I bought about another 40 copies over the next year online, and I paid like 5, 6, 7, maybe $8 per copy. So I took a risk. I gambled. I paid a few $100s on these books, and then what happened is, with the announcements of the movies coming out, I ran off to CGC. I got all the slabs, like all the comic books slabbed, and then they came back 9.8s, 9.6s, 9.4s. I had 1.92. Most of them came back 9.8s or 9.6s, and then I sold them all on eBay, or I listed them all on my comic shop, or I just sold them on my local classifieds, and people would, I'd meet somebody in a parking lot and just flip them. So I was basically buying them wholesale and then selling them individually. So again, this was pretty good. I probably netted, actually, as I do the math now in my head, I probably netted about $4,000 just on this one book, come to think of it. Or at least I was netting probably $60 a book. So I'm bought 40 copies, so whatever that is. Anyway, so I did all right on this one. I lucked out because I sat on this book for about 3.5 years before, and it wasn't worth anything. And then all of a sudden, one day I was just looking online and I just noticed, holy, Thor #1 is just worth a ton of money now. Geez, I've got 40 copies sitting in my basement. So this was one where I kind of lucked out. I kind of had actually given up hope on it, and I was just going to dump the copies. But luckily, there is a movie coming out, and people were interested, so I flipped my books. Another one that I lucked out on was Thanos #13. So this is the first appearance of Cosmic Ghost Rider. So I totally missed out on the first run of this. And what happened was I happened to have been in the States, and I happened to have found a comic book store in the middle of nowhere that happened to have the one on the left that says Thanos wins. It's the purple cover on the left hand side of the screen, and I found about 20 copies. Then I went online onto eBay and I found another 10 copies, and I snatched them up. I paid about 14 US per book, which was pretty expensive at the time because it had only been out for a couple months. I never did buy a first run book, like a first print, and I never bought the Albuquerque variant, which is on the far right hand side. But I did flip a bunch of those purple ones, and I wound up flipping them. A couple of them came back CGC 9.9, which was pretty cool, which was really rare. And so I wound up selling them for like 175 US dollars. So I wound up making like 90 US per book. And I had bought, I think, 30 copies. So anyway, like I say, I was making between 20 or 30 US profit and 90 US profit per book. So when you buy enough copies, you know, you can pretty much make it worth your while. One of my first flips was Amazing Spider-Man 700. Again, this one got some mainstream press because Peter Parker had apparently died in number 700. And so there were some pretty cool variants. I've got my top three here, which is the base cover on the left, and then the Martin cover in the middle, Skyline variant. And then the far right-hand side is actually an alternate cover that Steve Ditko drew that was originally intended to be the very first issue of Amazing Fantasy 15, like the very first issue of Spider-Man. So that then became Amazing Spider-Man 700. So that's a very rare variant that came out, and I did buy that one on my comic shop in an auction, and I flipped it. But I've bought Amazing Spider-Man 700 over the years. Just on eBay, there'll be lots that come up, and I'll just buy like copies of like 10 or 20 copies at a time, and then I just get them slabbed and I just sell them for, you know, ones and twos here and there. So again, this is just one of those ones where to me this is a modern day key, and the reason I call it a key is just because although Peter Parker's not dead anymore, there it seems to be a general sustained demand for at least these three versions of this issue. So again, this is just a modern example where I can flip it and make some cash. Sometimes a variant will come out and it'll be like a hot variant. So there's a couple online resources you can use. You can just Google comics trending or hot comics trending, and there's blogs that some guys get set up, which are pretty cool. And what they'll do is they'll talk about variant covers, or they'll talk about new comics dropping. Comics heating up is another one that I've used in the past. So what I did is I found out about this Hulk #1 variant that came out in 2017, and it's a homage cover to Hulk 181, which is the one where Wolverine's fighting the Hulk. Well, this has the female version, which is female Wolverine fighting She-Hulk. So I bought a bunch of copies through an online comic book store, and they showed up at the house, and they were in pretty good condition overall. Some of them were 9.8s, some were 9.6s, 9.4s, and then a couple were 9.2s. Overall, I wasn't thrilled with the quality online, and that's the big risk you run if you buy raw books online. You don't know if the mailman's going to sit on the package as it gets to your house. So I really prefer buying comics in person at a comic book store because you can really look and see and make sure that they're in high grade, really high grade. However, these were such a good deal, I couldn't say no. So I bought a whole bunch online. I think they were $20 US each, and then I wound up flipping them for about 170. The 9.8s anyway, I flipped for 170 each. So again, CGCing only costs like $18 to $25 to get them CGC'd. So again, there's a lot of time involved and a lot of research involved. But if you put the time in, and if you're really passionate about comics, you can make some money doing this because you're providing a value to somebody who wants to just buy one high grade copy. They don't want to buy a lot. They don't want to flip them themselves. So you are providing a service. And so to me, I think this is a neat way to make some money from a hobby perspective. All right, so I really hope you enjoyed watching this video. Again, there's some tips and tricks in here if you're interested in flipping comics for money. And if you liked what you saw here, consider subscribing. Thanks for watching, and talk to you later.